Grandma, you wouldn't understand modern education, my granddaughter said when I questioned her political science assignment. She was unaware that I had been a Harvard faculty member who had advised 3 U.S. presidents and held dual PhDs in political science and international relations. My name is Betty, and at 79 years old, I had apparently become an embarrassment to my granddaughter Emma during what should have been a simple evening of helping her with college coursework. The assignment that had triggered Emma's dismissive comment was a paper about international trade policy that contained several factual errors and analytical problems that I couldn't ignore. Emma, I think there might be some issues with your analysis of the NAFTA renegotiation process, I said, looking over the draft she had asked me to proofread. Grandma, this is graduate-level political science. It's really complicated stuff that requires understanding of modern economic theory and international relations. Modern economic theory. International relations. Subjects that I had not only studied extensively, but had taught at the highest academic levels for over 3 decades before my retirement. Sweetheart, I just think you might want to double-check some of your sources about the timeline of negotiations. Grandma, my professor is Dr. Williams from Georgetown. He's a real expert in this stuff, not like the teachers you knew back in the day. Dr. Williams from Georgetown. I wondered if Emma was referring to Dr. Robert Williams, whose dissertation I had supervised 15 years earlier when he was a doctoral student, and I was a full professor at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. But Emma had made an assumption about my educational background that was so far from reality that I wasn't sure how to correct it without completely restructuring her understanding of my life, my career, and my qualifications to comment on her academic work. The truth was that I had never told my family about my academic career. After retiring from Harvard at age 65, I had moved closer to family and had allowed everyone to assume that I was simply Grandma Betty, whose most significant accomplishment was raising their father and providing childcare support when needed. Emma, what if I told you that I might know more about political science than you're assuming? Grandma, I love you, but you're from a different generation. Education is so much more advanced now than it was when you were in school. A different generation. As if the generation that had lived through the Cold War, witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall, and observed decades of international relations had somehow become irrelevant to understanding modern political science. What generation do you think I'm from, Emma? You're from the generation that didn't have access to the kind of higher education that women have today. You probably got married young and focused on raising kids instead of pursuing advanced degrees. Got married young and focused on raising kids. Emma had constructed a narrative about my life that reflected common assumptions about women of my generation, but that bore no resemblance to my actual educational and professional history. The reality was that I had completed my undergraduate degree in political science at Radcliffe College, earned my first PhD in political science from Harvard, and then completed a second PhD in international relations from Oxford University. I had spent 30 years as a faculty member at Harvard, publishing extensively in academic journals and serving as a consultant to government agencies and international organizations. But my family had never shown interest in learning about my career or my qualifications. They had seen me primarily as wife, mother, and grandmother, whose most important role was providing family support, rather than pursuing intellectual achievement. Emma, what would you say if I told you that I had some college education? Grandma, I'd say that's great, but college was so different back then. It was probably more like high school is today. College was like high school. Emma's understanding of educational history suggested that she thought academic standards had somehow evolved dramatically over the past few decades, making her generation's education superior to anything previous generations could have achieved. Emma, what if I told you that I might have had more education than just some college? Grandma, you're being modest. I know you're smart, but advanced degrees were really rare for women back then. Most women didn't have the opportunities that my generation has. Advanced degrees were rare for women. Emma was right that women faced significant barriers to higher education in previous generations, but she was wrong about what some women had managed to achieve despite those barriers. Emma, what if I told you that I had graduate degrees? Grandma, even if you had a master's degree, graduate education has changed so much that it would be really different from what I'm studying now. A master's degree. Emma was willing to concede that I might have achieved a master's degree, but she couldn't imagine that someone from my generation might have achieved doctoral-level education that would be relevant to her current studies. But here's what Emma didn't know about my educational background. Here's the information that would have changed her entire approach to our conversation about her political science assignment. The paper she was writing about international trade policy was addressing topics that I had not only studied extensively, but had helped shape through my work as a consultant to the State Department during 3 different presidential administrations. The theories she was struggling to understand were theories that I had taught to hundreds of graduate students over 3 decades of university teaching. The professor she was citing as the ultimate authority on these subjects was someone whose academic career I had mentored and whose current position at Georgetown I had helped him obtain through letters of recommendation and professional connections. The mistakes in her analysis were mistakes that I could have corrected immediately, not because I was guessing or offering opinions, but because I had first-hand experience with the policies and negotiations she was trying to analyze. Emma, I think there's something about my background that you don't know. Grandma, what do you mean? I mean that you might be surprised by my educational qualifications and my knowledge of political science. Grandma, you're embarrassing yourself. This is really advanced academic material. Embarrassing myself. Emma thought that my interest in her academic work was evidence of an elderly woman who didn't understand the limits of her knowledge, rather than evidence of someone who actually had expertise in the subject matter. Emma, what if I showed you my diplomas? Your diplomas? Grandma, you don't need to prove anything to me. I know you went to college. Went to college. Past tense. Singular. As if one undergraduate degree was the extent of educational achievement that someone from my generation could have managed. Emma, what if I told you that I had diplomas from Harvard and Oxford? The silence that followed was not the silence of someone being impressed by unexpected educational achievements. It was the silence of someone who thought her grandmother was becoming confused about reality. Grandma, Harvard and Oxford are really prestigious schools. You don't think what, Emma? I don't think people like us went to schools like that back then. People like us. Emma had assumptions about our family's social class, educational background, and access to elite institutions that reflected her limited understanding of my life before she knew me. The conversation was reaching a point where I would need to decide whether to continue allowing Emma to dismiss my expertise, or whether to reveal educational achievements that would fundamentally change her understanding of my qualifications to comment on her academic work. The choice would determine not just how she approached her current assignment, but how she understood the capabilities and accomplishments of older adults, whose life stories she had never bothered to investigate. The decision to show Emma my diplomas required me to retrieve documents that I had kept in my home office for 15 years since retiring from Harvard. Credentials that represented decades of academic achievement that my family had never shown interest in learning about. Emma, I want you to see something. Can you come with me to my office? Grandma, you don't need to prove anything. I believe that you went to college. Went to college. Emma was still thinking in terms of basic undergraduate education, unable to imagine that her grandmother might have achieved the kind of academic credentials that would qualify me to evaluate her graduate-level coursework. I led Emma into my home office, a room that she had visited countless times over the years, but had never examined carefully. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing academic texts, professional journals, and published research that represented my career as a scholar and educator. Emma, look around this room. What do you see? Emma glanced around the office with the casual attention of someone who had never considered that her grandmother's possessions might contain evidence of significant professional achievement. I see a lot of old books, Grandma. You've always been a reader. Old books, academic texts that represented cutting-edge research in political science and international relations had been dismissed as evidence of recreational reading rather than professional scholarship. I walked to the filing cabinet where I kept my diplomas, awards, and professional certificates, documents that I had never displayed prominently because my family had never shown interest in my career or my qualifications. Emma, I want you to look at these documents. I handed her my doctoral diploma from Harvard University, a document that certified my completion of a PhD in political science with a specialization in international relations and American foreign policy. Emma stared at the diploma as if it were written in a foreign language. Grandma, this says PhD from Harvard University. That's correct, Emma. But this can't be real. You're my grandmother. You bake cookies and help with babysitting. Bake cookies and help with babysitting. Emma's understanding of my identity was so limited to family roles that she couldn't process evidence of professional achievement that existed outside of her experience with me. Emma, I can bake cookies and hold a PhD from Harvard. Those aren't mutually exclusive activities. I handed her my second doctoral diploma from Oxford University, my master's degree certificates, and my undergraduate degree from Radcliffe College. Emma, what do you see? I see diplomas that say you have 2 PhDs and degrees from some of the best schools in the world. And what does that suggest about my qualifications to comment on your political science assignment? Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing information that contradicted everything she had assumed about my educational background and my relevance to her academic work. Grandma, if these diplomas are real, then you're more qualified than most of my professors. Emma, these diplomas are real, and you're right that my qualifications are extensive. But why didn't you ever tell us? Why did you let us think you were just a grandmother whose most important accomplishments were domestic? I guess yes. Why didn't you tell us you were this accomplished? That was the question I had been dreading and preparing to answer for 15 years since my retirement. Emma, I didn't tell you because no one in the family ever asked about my career or showed interest in my professional life. You saw me as Grandma Betty, whose role was providing family support, not as Dr. Betty Chen, whose expertise might be relevant to your education. Dr. Betty Chen. Emma was hearing my professional title for the first time, despite having known me for 20 years. Dr. Chen, you're actually Dr. Chen. Emma, I was Professor Dr. Chen at Harvard for 30 years. I taught graduate courses in international relations, published research in academic journals, and served as a consultant to government agencies. And you never told us? Emma, would it have mattered? Would you have approached me differently if you had known about my academic background? Emma considered the question carefully. I think I would have been intimidated. I would have been afraid to ask you for help with homework, because I would have thought you were too smart. Too smart. Emma would have been intimidated by my qualifications rather than seeing them as resources that could benefit her education. But Emma, what about now? How does knowing about my background change your approach to my feedback on your assignment? Now I realize that when you questioned my analysis, you weren't being a nosy grandmother. You were being a professor who spotted problems in my work. And how does that change your response to my suggestions? It makes me want to listen more carefully and ask you to help me understand what I got wrong. That was the transformation I had been hoping to see, a shift from dismissing my input based on assumptions about my generation and my role, to recognizing my expertise and seeking to benefit from my knowledge. But there was more information about my career that would complete Emma's understanding of my qualifications to evaluate her academic work. Emma, there's something else you should know about my professional background. What's that, Grandma? Your professor, Dr. Williams from Georgetown? I supervised his doctoral dissertation when he was a graduate student. You supervised Dr. Williams? Emma, Dr. Williams was one of my doctoral students at Harvard. I was his dissertation advisor. The silence that followed was the silence of someone whose entire understanding of academic authority and expertise had just been reorganized. So when you questioned my assignment, you were evaluating work by a student of your former student. Emma, that's exactly right. And the errors in your analysis are errors that I've been correcting in student work for 30 years. And the sources I was using? Some of the sources you cited were research papers that I co-authored or reviewed for academic journals. Emma sat down heavily in my desk chair, processing the magnitude of her misconceptions about my qualifications and my relevance to her academic work. Grandma, I've been so stupid. I've been treating you like you didn't understand things that you literally helped create.
Emma, you weren't stupid.
You made assumptions based on limited information about my background and my career. But I should have asked. I should have been curious about your life before I was born. Emma, most young people don't think to ask their grandparents about their professional achievements. You saw me in family contexts, so you assumed that family roles were the extent of my identity. But that was wrong.
Emma, it was incomplete.
I am your grandmother who loves spending time with you. But I'm also Dr. Chen, who has expertise that could benefit your education if you're interested in learning from me. That distinction was crucial for Emma to understand, that my family role and my professional identity weren't competing aspects of who I was, but complementary parts of a complete person whose life experiences extended far beyond what she had observed in family settings. Grandma, Dr. Chen, what should I call you now? Emma, you can call me whatever feels comfortable. But when we're discussing your academic work, you might want to treat me as someone whose expertise is relevant to your learning. And my assignment? What should I do about all the mistakes you identified? Emma, if you're interested, I'd be happy to help you understand the concepts you're struggling with and guide you toward more accurate analysis. Would you really, even though I was so dismissive of your input? Emma, helping students learn is what I've done for my entire career. I'd be delighted to help you improve your work. As Emma began to understand that her grandmother was also a distinguished academic whose expertise could transform her educational experience, I realized that my decision to reveal my credentials had accomplished something more important than just correcting her political science assignment. It had challenged her assumptions about aging, achievement, and the hidden depths of people whose life stories she had never bothered to investigate. The tutoring session that began the following evening in my home office was unlike any homework help Emma had ever received. Instead of a grandmother offering gentle encouragement, she was receiving graduate-level instruction from a former Harvard professor whose expertise transformed her understanding of political science concepts she had been struggling with for months. Emma, let's start with your analysis of the NAFTA renegotiation. You've identified the key players correctly, but you're missing the underlying theoretical framework that explains their negotiating strategies. What theoretical framework, Dr. Chen? Dr. Chen. Emma had decided to use my professional title when we were discussing academic work, recognizing that our tutorial sessions were professional educational interactions, rather than casual family conversations. Emma, international trade negotiations are examples of game theory applications, where each party's strategy depends on their assumptions about other parties' priorities and constraints. I pulled out academic texts that I had written and edited, books that contained the theoretical frameworks Emma needed to understand, but that her current coursework had not adequately explained. This textbook, I said, showing her a volume on international relations theory, was a book I co-authored 15 years ago. Chapter 7 addresses exactly the kind of analysis you're trying to do in your assignment. Emma stared at the book as if she were seeing a family heirloom for the first time. Grandma, you wrote textbooks that students use for classes? Emma, I wrote textbooks, published research articles, and developed curriculum that is still being used in graduate programs around the world. And other professors know your work. Emma, other professors have cited my research, used my theoretical frameworks, and built on concepts that I developed during my academic career. That revelation helped Emma understand that her grandmother wasn't just someone who had attended prestigious universities, but someone who had contributed to the academic knowledge that current students and professors were using. Dr. Chen, can you help me understand why my analysis of the trade negotiations was wrong? Emma, your analysis focused on the stated negotiating positions rather than the underlying economic and political pressures that shaped those positions. You were looking at the surface-level diplomacy instead of the deeper strategic calculations. I walked Emma through the historical context, economic theory, and political considerations that explained the negotiating strategies she had misunderstood in her original assignment. Emma, international relations aren't just about what diplomats say publicly, they're about what domestic political pressures, economic interests, and strategic calculations are driving their decisions behind the scenes. And you know about those behind-the-scenes calculations? Emma, I spent years as a consultant to government agencies, analyzing exactly these kinds of strategic decisions and providing advice about negotiating strategies and policy implications. Consultant to government agencies. Emma was learning that my academic career had included practical experience with the policy-making processes she was studying theoretically. Dr. Chen, what agencies did you work with? Emma, I worked with the State Department, the National Security Council, and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative during 3 different presidential administrations. You advised presidents? Emma, I provided policy analysis and strategic recommendations that were used in presidential decision-making about international relations and trade policy. That information transformed Emma's understanding, not just of my qualifications, but of the real-world relevance of the academic concepts she was studying. So when you're helping me understand trade negotiations, you're drawing on experience with actual trade negotiations. Emma, I'm drawing on experience analyzing, advising on, and evaluating the outcomes of the kinds of negotiations you're studying in your coursework. But there was more about my academic and professional background that would complete Emma's understanding of the resources available to her through our family relationship. Emma, there's something else about my career that might interest you. What's that? I'm still academically active. I still review articles for professional journals, and I still occasionally lecture at universities. You're still working as a professor? Emma, I'm officially retired, but I maintain professional relationships and continue contributing to academic research and education. Like what kind of contributions? I showed Emma recent correspondence from academic journals, asking me to peer review submitted articles, invitations to speak at academic conferences, and requests from university departments to guest lecture in graduate seminars. Emma, just last month, I was invited to deliver a lecture at Oxford about current developments in international trade policy. You lectured at Oxford last month? Emma, I lectured at Oxford about the same topics you're studying in your current assignment. The irony was profound. While Emma had been struggling with concepts in her Georgetown coursework, her grandmother had been lecturing about those same concepts at one of the world's most prestigious universities. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to help me with more than just this one assignment? Emma, what did you have in mind? I was thinking, would you be willing to tutor me regularly, to help me understand not just specific assignments, but the bigger theoretical frameworks and practical applications? Emma, I would be delighted to work with you on your academic development, but I want you to understand that our tutorials would be serious academic work, not casual homework help. What do you mean? Emma, I would expect you to approach our sessions with the same seriousness you would bring to working with any professor. I would assign additional readings, expect written analyses, and evaluate your progress according to graduate-level standards. You would grade my work? Emma, I would provide the same kind of rigorous feedback and evaluation that I provided to my Harvard students. Emma considered the offer carefully, recognizing that accepting tutorial help from a former Harvard professor would be both an extraordinary educational opportunity and a significant academic challenge. Dr. Chen, I accept. I want to learn from your expertise, even if it means working harder than I've been working in my regular classes. Emma, there's one more thing you should know before we begin our formal tutorial arrangement. What's that? Your other professors, when they find out that you're receiving tutorial support from a former Harvard faculty member, they're likely to have higher expectations for your work. Higher expectations? Emma, when professors know that a student has access to expert tutoring, they expect that students' work to reflect the quality of that tutoring. So you're saying that working with you could actually make my classes more challenging? Emma, I'm saying that working with me will make you a better student, which will make you capable of meeting higher expectations and producing better work. That distinction was important for Emma to understand, that academic excellence wasn't about making work easier, but about developing capabilities that made challenging work possible. Dr. Chen, I'm ready for that challenge. I want to learn what you can teach me. As we concluded our first formal tutorial session and began planning a curriculum that would supplement Emma's regular coursework with advanced instruction in political science theory and methodology, I realized that my decision to reveal my academic credentials had accomplished something more significant than just helping Emma with her assignments. It had transformed our relationship from one based on family roles to one that included recognition of my professional expertise and Emma's genuine interest in learning from my knowledge and experience. The granddaughter who had dismissed my input as embarrassingly out of touch had become a student who was eager to benefit from instruction by a professor whose qualifications exceeded those of her university faculty. But the most important transformation was Emma's growing understanding that elderly adults might have professional achievements, continuing expertise, and current relevance that aren't apparent from their family roles or their generational stereotypes. 3 months after beginning our regular tutorial sessions, Emma had transformed from a struggling graduate student into one of the top performers in her political science program, earning recognition from professors who were amazed by the sophistication of her analysis and the depth of her theoretical understanding. Emma, your recent paper on international trade theory was exceptional, Dr. Williams told her after class. The level of analysis suggests that you've been receiving some extraordinary guidance. Professor Williams, I have been getting some help with my coursework. From whom? Are you working with a private tutor? Emma faced a choice about whether to reveal that her academic improvement was due to tutorial sessions with a former Harvard professor who happened to be her grandmother. Professor Williams, I've been receiving instruction from Dr. Betty Chen. Dr. Betty Chen? That name sounds familiar. Is she a faculty member here at Georgetown? No, Professor Williams. Dr. Chen is. She's my grandmother, and she's a retired Harvard professor. The silence that followed was the silence of someone processing information that challenged their assumptions about student resources and family relationships. Emma, Are you saying that your grandmother is Dr. Betty Chen, who was a faculty member at Harvard's Kennedy School? Yes, Professor Williams. Do you know her work? Emma, Dr. Chen supervised my doctoral dissertation. She was my dissertation advisor 15 years ago. The revelation that Emma's academic transformation was due to tutorial sessions with Professor Williams's former dissertation advisor created a situation that was both professionally awkward and academically impressive. Emma, Dr. Chen was one of the most respected faculty members at Harvard. If she's been tutoring you, that explains the remarkable improvement in your work. Professor Williams, would it be appropriate for me to continue receiving tutorial support from Dr. Chen? Emma, receiving instruction from a distinguished professor is always appropriate, regardless of your family relationship. But I'm curious, would Dr. Chen be willing to guest lecture for our graduate seminar? You want to invite my grandmother to lecture to your class? Emma, I want to invite Dr. Chen to share her expertise with graduate students who would benefit enormously from her knowledge and experience. That evening, Emma returned home with an invitation that would test my willingness to resume public academic activities and my family's readiness to learn about the full scope of my professional reputation. Dr. Chen, Professor Williams wants to know if you would be willing to guest lecture for his graduate seminar on international relations theory. Emma, what specifically would he want me to discuss? He said you could choose the topic, but he's particularly interested in your work on trade policy and international negotiations. And the students would be graduate students at Georgetown. Yes, and Professor Williams said that several faculty members would probably attend as well, because your reputation in the field is so strong. My reputation in the field? Emma was learning that her grandmother wasn't just someone who had achieved academic credentials, but someone whose professional work was still recognized and respected by current academics. Emma, if I agreed to lecture at Georgetown, that would mean revealing my academic background to your family and to the university community. Is that a problem? Emma, it would mean that I could no longer keep my professional identity private. Your parents, your cousins, and your university colleagues would all know that your grandmother is Dr. Chen.
And how do you feel about that?
I had been keeping my academic career private for 15 years, partly to avoid the complications of maintaining professional relationships during retirement, and partly because my family had never shown interest in learning about my work. Emma, I think it might be time for the family to know about my career, and I think I'd enjoy the opportunity to engage with graduate students again. So you'll do the lecture? Emma, I'll do the lecture. But I want you to understand that this will change how people think about our family and about my background. Dr. Chen, I think our family needs to know who you really are and what you've accomplished. The lecture that I agreed to deliver would require me to prepare material that demonstrated my current knowledge of international relations theory and my continuing engagement with academic research. It would also require me to reveal my professional identity to family members who had never known about my career. But first, I needed to inform my son David and my daughter-in-law Patricia that their daughter was receiving tutorial instruction from a former Harvard professor who happened to be their parent and mother-in-law. David, I need to tell you something about Emma's academic improvement. Mom, we're so proud of how well she's doing in graduate school. Her professors are amazed by her work. David, Emma's improvement is due to tutorial sessions she's been having with me. With you? Mom, you've been helping her with homework? David, I've been providing graduate-level instruction in political science and international relations. But Mom, you don't have a background in political science. David's assumption that I lacked academic qualifications in Emma's field of study reflected his complete ignorance of my educational background and professional career. David, actually I do have a background in political science. A very extensive background. What do you mean? I showed David the same diplomas I had shown Emma, doctoral degrees from Harvard and Oxford, academic certificates, and professional credentials that represented 30 years of university teaching and research. Mom, these diplomas, are these real? David, these diplomas represent my career as a professor and researcher before you ever knew about my professional life. But you never told us you were a professor. David, you never asked about my career. You knew me as your mother and Emma's grandmother, so you assumed that family roles were the complete extent of my identity. So when Emma says you've been tutoring her, David, I've been providing the same kind of instruction I provided to Harvard graduate students for 3 decades. The conversation that followed required David to process not just my educational achievements, but his realization that he had never shown curiosity about my life before I became his mother and his children's grandmother. Mom, why didn't you tell us you were this accomplished? David, would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently if you had known about my academic background? I think I would have been more interested in your opinions about politics and current events. And now?
Now I realize that I've been dismissing input from someone whose expertise could have benefited our family's understanding of important issues.
That recognition was exactly what I had hoped. David would develop an understanding that elderly adults might have professional knowledge and continuing expertise that could benefit their families if family members were interested in learning from them. David, there's something else you should know. Georgetown University has invited me to guest lecture for a graduate seminar. They've invited you to lecture at Georgetown? David, they've invited Dr. Chen to share her expertise with graduate students and faculty members. And you're going to do it? David, I'm going to resume some academic activities. Emma's tutorial sessions have reminded me how much I enjoy teaching and how much knowledge I have to share. As David processed the information that his mother was not just a retired grandmother, but a distinguished academic whose expertise was still valued by major universities, I realized that my decision to reveal my credentials to Emma had initiated a broader transformation in how my entire family understood my capabilities, my achievements, and my continuing potential for contribution and growth. The granddaughter who had told me I was embarrassing her was about to watch her grandmother lecture to graduate students at one of the nation's most prestigious universities. The morning of my guest lecture at Georgetown University, I felt a familiar mixture of excitement and preparation that I hadn't experienced in 15 years since my retirement from Harvard. Standing in front of graduate students and faculty members would require me to demonstrate that my expertise was current, relevant, and valuable to a new generation of scholars. Emma had helped me prepare by providing information about the students' background knowledge, their current coursework, and the specific concepts they were struggling to understand in their international relations studies. Dr. Chen, the students are really excited to hear from you, Emma said, as we drove to Georgetown. Professor Williams told them that you're one of the most respected scholars in the field. Emma, I just hope my knowledge is still current enough to be useful to them. Dr. Chen, you've been reviewing academic journals and staying up to date with research. You're probably more current than some professors who've been focused on administrative work rather than scholarship. Emma's confidence in my academic readiness was touching, but I knew that lecturing to graduate students would test not just my knowledge, but my ability to communicate complex concepts in ways that would engage and educate young scholars whose approaches to learning might be different from the students I had taught decades earlier. Emma, how many students will be attending the lecture? Professor Williams said about 20 graduate students, plus several faculty members who want to hear your presentation. 20 graduate students and faculty members who would evaluate my expertise, my presentation skills, and my continued relevance to academic discourse in political science and international relations. The lecture hall was more crowded than Emma had predicted. In addition to the enrolled students and regular faculty, several visiting scholars and advanced undergraduate students had been invited to attend what Professor Williams had advertised as a rare opportunity to learn from one of Harvard's most distinguished emeritus faculty. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Williams began, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Betty Chen, who supervised my doctoral dissertation and who is one of the most respected scholars in international relations theory. Chen will be discussing current developments in international trade policy and their theoretical implications. As I approached the podium, I realized that this lecture would determine not just how Georgetown students and faculty evaluated my expertise, but how I understood my own continued capacity for academic contribution after 15 years of retirement. Thank you, Professor Williams, and thank you to the students and faculty for inviting me to share some thoughts about international relations theory and its applications to current policy challenges. I had chosen to focus my lecture on recent developments in international trade negotiations, using theoretical frameworks I had developed during my career to analyze current policy decisions and their implications for global economic relationships. Today, I want to discuss how game theory applications can help us understand the strategic calculations behind recent trade policy decisions and how these decisions reflect broader changes in international power dynamics. The students were taking notes with the focused attention of people who recognized that they were receiving instruction from someone whose expertise was exceptional. But more importantly, they were asking questions that demonstrated engagement with the concepts I was presenting. Dr. Chen, one student asked, your analysis suggests that current trade negotiations reflect a fundamental shift in how major powers approach international economic relationships. Can you elaborate on the theoretical implications of that shift? That's an excellent question. The shift reflects what I call strategic interdependence recalibration, a process where nations are reassessing the costs and benefits of economic integration based on changing geopolitical priorities. Strategic interdependence recalibration. I was introducing theoretical concepts that I had been developing through my continued research and analysis, concepts that were current and relevant to understanding contemporary international relations. Dr. Chen, another student asked, how do your theoretical frameworks apply to understanding China's Belt and Road Initiative? China's Belt and Road Initiative is an excellent example of how theoretical models of strategic investment can be used to create new forms of international influence that operate outside traditional diplomatic frameworks. The questions continued for the full lecture period, with students and faculty members engaging deeply with concepts that I was presenting. Their questions were sophisticated, their engagement was genuine, and their appreciation for my expertise was evident. After the lecture, Professor Williams approached me with several faculty members who wanted to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Dr. Chen, that was an exceptional presentation. The students were completely engaged, and your analysis of current developments was remarkably insightful. Thank you, Professor Williams. I enjoyed the opportunity to engage with graduate students again. Dr. Chen, I want to ask you something. Would you be interested in teaching a seminar next semester? We could arrange a visiting scholar appointment that would allow you to offer a graduate course in international relations theory. Professor Williams, are you offering me a teaching position at Georgetown? Dr. Chen, I'm offering you the opportunity to return to active teaching if you're interested. Your expertise is exactly what our graduate program needs. A teaching position. After 15 years of retirement, I was being invited to resume active academic work at one of the nation's leading universities. Professor Williams, I'm honored by the offer. Let me consider it and discuss it with my family. As Emma and I drove home from Georgetown, I realized that my guest lecture had accomplished something I hadn't expected. It had demonstrated that my expertise was not just historically valuable, but currently relevant and in demand by academic institutions. Dr. Chen, that lecture was incredible. The students were completely engaged, and the faculty members were taking notes too. Emma, how do you feel about your grandmother being offered a teaching position at your university? I feel proud. I feel excited, and I feel like I understand for the first time how accomplished you really are. And how does that change your perspective on our family relationship? It makes me realize that I've been learning from someone whose expertise is recognized internationally, not just someone who happens to be my grandmother. Emma, I'm both. I'm your grandmother who loves you, and I'm Dr. Chen, whose expertise can benefit your education and your future career. That evening, I called David to inform him about the lecture and the teaching offer, knowing that his response would help me understand how my family processed the revelation of my continuing professional relevance. Mom, how did the lecture go? David, it went very well. The students were engaged, the faculty were impressed, and Georgetown has offered me a visiting scholar position to teach graduate seminars. They offered you a job? David, they offered me the opportunity to return to active teaching if I'm interested in resuming academic work. And are you interested? David, I'm considering it. But I want to understand how my family feels about me returning to professional activities. Mom, I think we're all still processing the fact that you're this accomplished. If you want to return to teaching, we support you. And how does it feel to learn that your mother is someone whose expertise is valued by major universities? David was quiet for a moment, considering the implications of having a parent whose professional achievements exceeded anything he had known about. Mom, it makes me proud. But it also makes me feel like I never really knew you.
David, you knew me as your mother.
Now you're learning about me as a complete person whose life includes professional achievements as well as family relationships.
And going forward?
Going forward, I hope you'll be interested in learning more about my work and my ideas, instead of just seeing me as someone whose most important role is providing family support. That conversation established the foundation for transformed family relationships based on recognition of my complete identity rather than just my family roles. But the most significant outcome of my Georgetown lecture was the decision I made about Professor Williams's teaching offer and what it meant for my understanding of aging, retirement, and continued contribution. 6 months after accepting Georgetown's visiting scholar position, I was standing in my own classroom again, teaching a graduate seminar in advanced international relations theory to 25 graduate students who had competed for admission to a course taught by a Harvard professor whose expertise was attracting students from universities across the region. The transformation from embarrassing grandmother to distinguished visiting professor had been swift, but it had also revealed important truths about aging, capability, and the assumptions that society makes about elderly adults' continued potential for professional contribution. Dr. Chen, one of my students, asked during a seminar discussion, "Your theoretical framework for analyzing international negotiations seems to anticipate developments that other scholars are just beginning to recognize. How do you stay so current with evolving geopolitical dynamics?" Sarah, theoretical frameworks are only useful if they help us understand current realities. I stay current by continuing to read, research, and analyze international developments, rather than assuming that retirement means intellectual retirement. My students represented a new generation of scholars who were benefiting from instruction by someone whose career had spanned decades of international relations history, but who had remained intellectually active and analytically sharp during years when many people assumed I was simply enjoying quiet retirement. Dr. Chen, another student asked, "Do you think there are other retired professors whose expertise could benefit current students if universities made better efforts to engage emeritus faculty?" Michael, I think there are accomplished professionals in every field whose knowledge and experience could benefit younger generations if society made better efforts to recognize and utilize their continuing capabilities. That question addressed one of the broader implications of my return to teaching, the recognition that elderly adults might have professional expertise and intellectual capabilities that could benefit society if families, institutions, and communities were interested in accessing their knowledge rather than assuming that age means irrelevance. Emma had enrolled in my seminar, not because of our family relationship, but because she wanted to continue learning from my expertise in a formal academic setting. "Professor Chen," Emma said during class, using my professional title in the academic environment, "your analysis of current trade negotiations draws on historical examples that most of our other professors don't reference. How does historical perspective change our understanding of contemporary policy challenges?" Emma, historical perspective allows us to recognize patterns, identify precedents, and understand the long-term implications of current decisions rather than just reacting to immediate developments. Emma's question demonstrated the kind of analytical thinking that had developed through our tutorial sessions and that was now benefiting her performance in graduate school. But the most significant aspect of my return to teaching was the recognition I was receiving from academic institutions beyond Georgetown. Harvard University had invited me to deliver the annual Kennedy School Distinguished Lecture, recognizing my contributions to political science and international relations research. Oxford University had offered me a visiting fellowship that would allow me to spend a semester teaching and conducting research at my alma mater. The American Political Science Association had awarded me their Career Achievement Award for distinguished scholarship and service to the profession. Dr. Chen, Professor Williams said after one of my seminars, "I want you to know that your return to active teaching has been transformational for our graduate program. Students are applying to Georgetown specifically to study with you." Professor Williams, "I want you to know that returning to teaching has been transformational for me as well. I had forgotten how energizing it is to engage with young scholars who are passionate about learning." "And your family? How do they feel about your return to academic life?" Professor Williams, "My family is still adjusting to the revelation that their grandmother and mother is also Dr. Chen, whose expertise is valued by universities and students. That adjustment had required my family to fundamentally reconsider their assumptions about aging, capability, and the continuing potential for growth and contribution in later decades of life." David had begun attending my public lectures, not just to support me as his mother, but to learn from my expertise about international relations and political science. Patricia had started reading my published research and asking thoughtful questions about my academic work during family gatherings. Emma had decided to pursue a PhD in international relations, partly inspired by our tutorial sessions and her experience in my graduate seminar. "Dr. Chen," Emma said during one of our family dinners, "I want to ask you about something professional." "What's that, Emma?" "Would you be willing to serve as my dissertation advisor when I begin my doctoral program?" "Emma, are you asking me to supervise your PhD research?" "I'm asking if you would guide my development as a scholar the way you guided Professor Williams and dozens of other doctoral students." Emma's request represented the culmination of our transformed relationship, from a granddaughter who had dismissed my input as embarrassing to a student who wanted to learn from my expertise, to a future scholar who wanted my guidance for her own academic career. Emma, I would be honored to serve as your dissertation advisor, but you should understand that I would expect the same scholarly standards from you that I expected from all my doctoral students. Dr. Chen, I wouldn't want anything less than your complete academic expectations. As I looked around the dinner table at family members who had spent years seeing me primarily as their grandmother and mother, but who were now learning to appreciate my identity as Doc Chen, whose expertise could benefit their understanding of important issues, I realized that my decision to reveal my credentials to Emma had accomplished something more significant than just helping her with college coursework. It had challenged my family's assumptions about aging and demonstrated that elderly adults might have professional achievements, continuing expertise, and ongoing potential for contribution that aren't apparent from their family roles. The moral of this story: never assume that the elderly adults in your life have reached the limits of their capability or relevance. Never dismiss their input based on generational stereotypes without investigating their actual qualifications and experience. And never underestimate the continuing potential for growth, contribution, and achievement that might exist in people whose most impressive accomplishments might be hidden behind the comfortable assumptions of family roles. That's how being called embarrassing became the catalyst for an academic renaissance that proved expertise doesn't diminish with age, it deepens with experience. That's how a granddaughter's dismissive comment became the foundation for renewed professional recognition and continuing contribution to education and scholarship. Life has a way of revealing that our assumptions about aging and capability are often more limiting than the actual potential that exists in elderly adults, whose life stories we haven't bothered to investigate. Sometimes the most important discovery families can make is that their elderly relatives might be far more accomplished, qualified, and relevant than their family roles suggest. I have more stories about elderly adults whose families underestimated their achievements, dismissed their expertise, and learned important lessons about the hidden depths of people whose professional accomplishments were overshadowed by assumptions about aging and irrelevance. Stories about grandparents whose credentials would shock their families and whose continuing capabilities could transform their grandchildren's educational and professional opportunities. So pull up a chair, maybe ask an elderly family member about their career and their achievements, and remember that the person you think is embarrassingly out of touch might actually be more qualified than your professors and more accomplished than you could imagine. Because we're only just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next.